Okay, I got a lot of slack for this post I just made, and I was basically faced with where's the camera? With the option of either taking it down because I got a lot of flack from friends of mine, and I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. Um, when I talk about this subject, I sometimes risk offending people that are close to me, that have known me for a long time, that have been part of my life. And so I decided whether I thought, well, should I just take it down and or explain it? And I feel that it merits explanation because it's not a big deal. It's not meant to attack America, or it's just meant to be fair, and it's not anti-gay, anti-homosexual at all. And that's what I'm going to explain, because I feel that at least, even though some people may still feel they don't agree with as much as they feel they understand my explanation or my clarification, I feel I owe at least the people who reacted and acted up and to explaining what I meant, because I realize that it's not so clear, and I recognize also that comparing it's not a symmetrical, fair, equal comparison. It's not the same to compare. It's the responsibility towards the responsibility that is related to laboratories and research and accidents that can happen, or what have you, whatever the ideas, the hypotheses is about the virus getting out of a lab and blaming countries, um, compared to what the post is poking at, which is uh, completely different. Actually, it's not symmetrical. It's kind of a stretch, and it's more about creating a sociological situation that reverberated through several decades into a world condition to where I'm concluding that responsibility uh, could be seen. It's a bit of a stretch. It's not symmetrical to the first case, I realize. But if the Chinese wanted to, for example, in this case, the Chinese are being attacked. So if they wanted to, they could say, well, you look at what you did as far as the health issue goes with regarding HIV by, um, you know, promoting, disseminating, or really being militant about, well, this is what I need to explain because it's the United States did not go and tell people to start living gay. An idea can affect a social condition. An idea towards how to think about something can unleash and can affect a social condition, resulting in situations. So there is a responsibility that is tied to it, but it's really a kind of requires it warrants an explanation, and that's what I feel I can do fairly briefly, with and taking the opportunity to add some other value by expanding on other subjects that are all supportive of this explanation that I want to make so that people understand why I posted that. So I'm going to pause right now and think about how I'm going to organize what I'm going to say. Okay, so the way I'm going to do it, because it's a difficult dissertation, is to lay down concrete concepts so that they will relate and make sense uh, as they would build up upon each other. And then that way you, the listener, can see the conclusion it drives to. So I'm not going to make the conclusion. I'm going to establish concrete notions, which would then infer to the listener, well, therefore that means and the conclusion is built would be I would build up to how the post makes sense. Okay, the first notion I want to bring up is the idea, the notion, the question of, is nature perfect? Does nature design all the living forms that we know on this earth? Is it perfect in its form? And so that is a kind of a philosophical question, I guess, to some. And I will just say that nature is perfect. Of course, it's perfect for the purposes of evolution and how evolution achieves and plows forward in the cosmos and on Earth, creating and doing all that it does according to ways that we're still learning, we're still discovering. We don't know exactly how evolution chooses. We have theories, right? Survival of the fittest and all this stuff that, there are conclusions, but really we didn't make evolution. We didn't make life in the cosmos, so we couldn't really be absolutely true in our understanding of evolution. So, but we conceptually could say that it is perfect, of course. There is no room for judgment because it knows what it's doing, in other words, right? Now, then we have, in the context of human existence on Earth, mankind or humankind with his intelligence. We have a cognitive reasoning intelligence that is eons beyond what animals can do, in that we are able to understand life, biological life, and aspects that we have called science that pretend to investigate, understand, and describe and explain evolution, for example. And with such a perspective, we can look upon ourselves, and we can maybe make our existence better because we basically know what we want, and more of something in our estimation would be even better for our survival or for our health. At the same time, our own intelligence can be our worst enemy because, as we know, the prowess of our capacity will invent things and do things and design things that end up hurting, creating poisons and killing our own babies at wars and making governments that purport being just and wonderful, and to bring peace and order and what have you. And in reality, and then we see that every single government throughout history has produced populations that are suffering, masses of people that are not enjoying what a tiny minority somewhere else is enjoying, right? So all our sciences and all our inventions demonstrate sort of having some kind of handicap. We can never get it right. All our sciences fail: biology, science, politics, philosophy, philosophy, psychology, even the esoteric or the abstract, rational intelligence, logical intelligence, also by nature, by the same properties of our actual physical engineering, scientific sciences that fail also fail. We don't see it as clearly because, and we come to believe that we know what we understand about the human thinking and philosophy and what have you. But in reality, they're just constructions of logic upon life, just as a way of producing food or a way of creating transport, understanding chemistry or building engineering has a way of understanding life and building with it or building upon it, and it fails. It took us a long time to make buildings that didn't fall on our heads, and we still have problems. We still, anyways. So, what does this tell us? That human intelligence, I had the word and I want to remember exactly how I had it thought just a little while ago. Okay, never mind. The point is that the verdict is always not turned in, is still not out on all the things that we believe we understand about living form and existential design of life, uh, of life forms. And so, what are we talking about? We were talking about the post talks about homosexuality, right? And so, right away, you have to explain the logic behind it because there's basically um, there's basically two areas that are governing thoughts about homosexuality, human homosexuality in the West, led by the West, and it's all being led by the Anglo-American culture. I mean, the vanguard, the arrowhead of how we culturally believed to be right regarding homosexuality, and the progressive and the sort of the the spearhead of change has is being led by the United States. So in this context is where I said the Chinese, could turn it around and say, hey, your leadership of how we ought to think about homosexuality has brought about this condition. Um, and so the two areas that are basically being sort of argued or debated is basically can get summarized as uh, is homosexuality something that um, evolution intends on happening to a certain number of individuals? I mean, is it a purposeful design to actually, because that would really annul a lot of necessary explanations, which is kind of what we are leaning towards in the West. We're basically saying that for whatever reason you're born that way, God made you that way, and that way is an alternate, an alternative or an option of nature. You're either straight or gay, right? And so, um, and the other camp would be it is not actually nature's preference, and then that can go towards the more extremist or zealous, righteous, religious perspective of God will punish you, and but they're all basically on the side of nature does not want that. That is wrong. It shouldn't happen, right? And so, um, upon in the middle of this, we have a human precocious intelligence. We decide, we're deciding what life wants and how we should think about our sexuality and how we treat each other and countries and philosophies and sciences, and we're basically laying down what we ought to believe and what we ought to think about everything that happens to us in life. Um, and okay, I'm getting lost again. Let me. Okay, so in this zealous kind of vehemency to have to solve the problem, because the problem was the idea of homosexuality has never found settlement or peace. There's always something that a group of people that act up, condemn it, judge, are uncomfortable, and then there's secrecy, and then there's that has evoked a necessity to solve this never-ending uh, sort of it's not a question. It's something that gets thrown at us by the species all the time, right? And so we have attempted throughout history to answer it, to finalize, to explain it to all those people, and we certainly also have caused a negative reaction towards our excessive hostility and anger and killing, and that's because that goes against the prime directive sort of evolution of making the species survive and not killing one another. And so that also caused, and so we're always kind of like moving, never answering this question until recently, uh, around the 70s, basically, well, before the 70s, in the field of psychology appears, the human science of psychology around the turn of the century or something, whenever Freud or before Freud, the science of psychology emerges, we discover that, hey, we behave according to how we've been affected while we're growing and as children, and it turns out that starts getting manifest in our personalities. And so psychology took homosexuality and say, you know what, guess what? This comes also from stuff that happened in our relationship to our father, how we were treated by our parents, by our mother, by how other siblings treated, and they start giving a psychological explanation until the 70s, which is really progress, because all of a sudden we started answering the question that we have wanted to answer for all of humanity. Instead of throwing them off the cliff, we're going to say, no, wait, hang on a second. This happens to the human species because 2 points, or colon, or we call two little dots. And then what happens? Christopher Street, Stonewall, and it does not deserve to be treated with violence, and people should have, and then the whole thing about civil rights, and I have the right to freedom, and I have the right to be, and everything, and all that started playing in. And we didn't realize, but we slowly turned it into an activity that we ought to be free to have, and it became part of the dominion of civil rights. Instead of medical physiology, psychology, and human sciences, and medicine, anatomy, and so we took it away from human sexuality, which was actually an opportunity for us to stop dividing ourselves. So because before it was so difficult to deal, it was so offensive, and yet it happened, that had always been a division in human history. And so we answered it. We answered that question in several ways. We gave it room, we gave it space, and we allocated to certain instances of culture or activities or professions or roles in society. Witch doctors take care of the kids, play toys of the senators for the Romans and the Greeks. There was always some way of understanding, of solving this split. And for the first time, psychology said, no, wait, it's not something that happens to only some people and not others. It happens to some people, but because of something that is collectively human, psychology could happen to anybody. And we quashed that it's like we stopped that argument and we made it into a civil right. And what happens? When we turned it into a civil right, into something that is a freedom of expression, something you have the right to do and to express if you want to, the question of why it occurs still lingered in the back of our subconscious, because there's something that never quite settled, and that's a subject in itself in science that can be explained. And so in order to have peace with that question that is still in the back, we decided to say, well, you know what, let's stop thinking about it. You're just born that way. And so and the language helps us, because you state you are or I am not. And if you say I am gay or I am not gay, or he is gay or he is not gay, what you're always reinforcing is that there's two types of people, two gender categories. And so we went back, in a sense, we regressed. We went back to that, well, this is too difficult to figure out. We're just going to establish that somehow it happens. Okay, so wait, let me see where I'm going to go from this point. Right. So in order to proceed, we have to concur, or you have to, if you don't agree, we have to go along I will try to explain why I believe this is correct. But in any ways, you would have to humor it for it to complete the logic of, how the post makes sense. It would not be the intention of evolutionary design to create every so many people, a certain number of people that fulfill and complete themselves sexually with the same gender. That's what's being that the brain and the gender evolve together. Of course, there is, we know this, it gets argued, but I understand why we argue it when the medical establishment says it clearly. There is a female brain and a male brain. There is no judgment or prejudice to better or worse. We complement, we are the same, and yet we're different in a similar way that ends up being the same, and whatever, without going into that, there are ways of identifying, and that makes sense because with each agreement, with each person that evolved in order to have a baby in their tummy and have the baby in its arms and breastfeed and it's a variation. Okay, I'll call the male a variation. It doesn't really matter. Will agree the brain to fulfill that different form must be in agreement. So, oops, I got lost again. Jesus Christ. Okay, and so what this means basically is that homosexuality happens to human sexuality for reasons that we were just starting to rummage through. We were starting to see mainly the main forces that enact the full-on finalization, are psychological, are nurturing of how you related to your mother, how much your mother allowed you to bond, or how well you were able to bond, or how well your dad was to, establish a bond with you, all of that. Um, and what you identify with does not come from something before birth. It comes from what you learn when you're born. You learn to identify by what you're taught to identify as. What else would you have to learn from? You can't learn from something that didn't exist. You didn't exist before birth. There are tendencies. There's sort of a each one is a snow. Each one of us is a snowflake. We will perform differently, all of us, and there may be groups of people that are similar. There may be, types, body types, but basically, where we will perform differently given the same circumstances. The same circumstances will very strongly be conducive to somebody not finding their maleness, not learning their masculinity, their self-assured male sexual self-assuredness, and not learn how to relate and bounce off his peers, his other little peers of the same sex as he's growing up, uh, and yet still they may succeed and discover who they like who they are when they're in love with, when they meet that first girl, they have sex with that girl the first time, and then it keeps going. But uh, another person may be much strongly impacted by the same conditions, and really find so now, how do you say this? Soothing harbor, when it's like you find something that just is that band-aid that hits the spot, and so they may find the homosexual experience much more on the nail. It really might hit it for them. Although they had the same upbringing circumstances, so it's a combination. It's a combination of how you're more predisposed to be affected by the same situations. But basically, what we started seeing is that most of it has to do with nurturing. And then there's, of course, the part that we're also talking about, which is the chemical, biological, the hormonal environment in the belly of the mother, I mean, and environmental chemicals that may act in the development of and the sexuality of the parents and the development of the fetus and all these things. I mean, like when I was just saying, men and women, the concept we really need to grab strongly is that we have to really leave and abandon this polarity of either or. To understand the relationship between males and women, men and women, you have to be able to be three-dimensional and know that they can be like the other, and a woman can do all the same things a man can, and a man, unless it's having a baby, raising a baby, nurturing a baby, can do the same things a woman can. Yet they can be different. We know there are differences, and so what we never reconcile is that those two things can be together. That we are the same and that we're different as one compared to the other can be the same or different. Both are true. This is very important to understand so much about life. We have to relax. We have to let it just be there and know that it depends on a lot of things. It could one day could look more like this, and the other day it could look more like that, and that is very helpful in understanding uh, the whole thing about feminism and this battle of either or symmetrical equality. And we made a mess. We made a complete mess because we weren't able to just wait a second. This is three-dimensional. This is spatial. Sometimes it can look that way, but then we are unique in these other instances, and that we killed by saying we symmetrically have to be able to perform and function the same identical way as the other gender. And so we made this linear mirrored thing that has obliterated all sophisticated understanding of the complementation between wondrous spatial complementation between the two genders. So that said, when it comes to homosexuality clearly seems to be something, and this is the irony, that we see this in nature, but we are skittish, we're embarrassed or ashamed perhaps, or it's too difficult, too heavy, who knows, but we aren't able to apply it to ourselves. We know that how little turtles or other animals are raised will lead to the offspring coming out seeking males, seeking the same sex, or their eggshells being weak or what have you. We know that sexuality is a direct barometer of environment, and the offspring, and the sexuality that develops in the offspring is a direct barometer of environmental forces, and that means psychology and sociology and chemical, hormonal environment and forces that will influence. But also, what we understand is that regardless of the inclinations, or sort of the ease in being more strongly affected by certain conditions than others, what really will form our sexuality is how we develop growing up, and it is so strong. It is the majority of how and I see it in some European countries all the time. You see men that coming from the States or coming from other cultures, in Argentina too, you see guys in Europe where you go, this guy, he would do it. He would go for it. You can tell that he would just be smothered, and how do you say, smitten by a guy's love, and he would not see what the big deal is, and before you know it, and yet he's married. He has children, and he really doesn't want to leave that. He's perfectly comfortable and stable in that. But when you look at that guy, you see a personality that in another culture, and like in our culture in America, this guy would have never survived heterosexual in a marriage, because society would have come at him from all directions, pulling him, and if not, trying to hit on him at a park or whatever, even that guy would have. And yet in Europe, you see these guys that are very, very not soft, but sensitive, and caring and nurturing, very maternal-like. And to us, it seems like, oh, he's gay. Some gay guy in West Hollywood would say, and yet you would not want to ruin the happiness and the stability and the true gender. His feet are where they want to be. You wouldn't want to mess with that. And so it's very interesting to observe the what exactly makes somebody, if indeed there is no separation, if human sexuality can express homosexuality in anybody, it means that nobody's really born, as we were starting to talk about in the 70s, nobody's born to destined to optimally fulfill themselves. If it seems that way now, it very likely and very obviously is because we conduct that person socially. The mother starts saying, "Oh, look, I have a gay kid. How wonderful! I'm not going to get in the way. I'm going to enhance his personality." The kid's like 4 months old because he tried to grab a little doll or something. The mother got it into her head that, and so and she was educated by society, and so she started, "Don't, no, 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 be yourself. I'm not going to judge you." And the kid, who's learning everything from everything that's coming around him when he's 5 months old or when he's 5 years old, will say, "Oh, well, oh, it looks like mom loves me, and I like seeing her happy when she accepts me for being a girl. Okay, so I must be a girl." We nurture homosexuality, and we know this. I'm not coming up with. I'm not inventing this. There is people talking about this, um, and so okay, got lost again. I gotta stop. Okay, I'll just cut to the chase. Going back to the post, um, did the United States and England and France or whatever create more homosexuality in the world than there would have been otherwise? I mean, that's basically what the post is based on, right? That we should be responsible. Well, first of all, HIV was more diffused because of homosexuality. Where there was homosexuality, it exploded, just like what we're learning about contagion and how one gives 10 and 10 gives 1,000, 1,000 gives a million. The same way happened with HIV. So if it exploded in the gay community, there is a responsibility, not a responsibility, I'm sorry, I take that back. There is definitely a physical placement of the what do you call it, the array of expansion of the disease centered around the homosexual community. I mean, that's goes it's almost like a no-brainer. We all know that, but the trouble we have is moral. We don't say a lot of things, and the states gets very defensive with the Catholic Church and the Pope, and then there's these little confrontations because there are points where we have to acknowledge that, yeah, in the gay community or because of gay society or being gay means that or doesn't mean that, and oh, we realize that we're about to say that, and we're all programmed to embrace it and not touch it and let it be. It's saying, it's your right to do whatever you want with your butt and your John Thomas, and we don't think anymore there. We don't think, we don't want to be any more intelligent or reason or go take psychology. No, we're going to shut psychologists up. We're going to shut them up. They can't even talk about therapy anymore. No, I don't care if you figure out a way that finally it's actually starting to be in the right ballpark, and you chucked the racket. They used to hit people. They were experimenting. They were doing horrible things. But we don't care what you discovered. We're gonna, shut the whole thing up. And it's so. I see it so much. I see it in Facebook groups as there is a fanaticism towards taking more so than ever homosexuality towards religion and faith and the church, because there it's safe. There nobody can touch that there, and you can say you can belong to a church and you can be saved, and okay, it's the church's business. But even in those environments, even in secular groups that I've belonged to in Facebook, like North, they're populated by faith church people. And if you try to say, I don't get something like this happened to me. This is supposed to be, Joseph Nicolsi founded this. He was a famous psychologist who wanted he was exploring retroactive therapy and what have you. Isn't this supposed to be secular? They kicked me out of the group because they're so jealously owning of the subject of homosexuality. They who did that? It wasn't the church that did that, because in actuality, the church and the Catholic Church in certain countries actually are totally into exploring the psychology. That's their progressiveness. They don't punish you and throw you and blame you for a lying, listening to the devil. We do that in the States. In Italy, they have Radio Maria, where there was a doctor talking about the psychological understanding of homosexuality. That's our invention, those punishing inquisitional Catholics. So we are the ones that had a problem with looking for the true sociological or human sciences explanation of homosexuality as it would be true to science and social development and all the stuff that we were ourselves exploring already, and we decided to shut it up and just turn it into a civil issue. And then when we did that and turn it into a civil right, I know I'm repeating myself, we went backwards because the question always had to be answered, and so we answered it by saying no more thinking about it. It's just going to be that you're born that way, and we're not, try to talk about it. I don't, the truth is self-evident. Try in any American street to talk about we're so tired about it. People get angry if you don't lighten up about it and just let people whatever. But there may be some value to that, but at the same time, if you know the pain and the deep, this is profound. It's not superficial, but I didn't even want to get into that. But moral character, self-love, and a sense of it's just too much right now. What I want to say, I want to do the math, and I'm taking a tangent. The math of the post I made. Why could you say that America caused more homosexuality than would have been otherwise, meaning it caused more HIV to happen because of homosexual activity, as I just explained? Because left the West and the whole world to the ways of just, being very shy and very harboring of confusion or resentment or fear or what have you, a dark area that had arrived at psychological, at nurturing, at why this happens to the human species yet, and was still in this division of some people are gay and, no mention of civil rights yet. Let's go back to, I don't know, the 20s or the 1800s. We were already, we have been probably since before the Greeks or the Romans, living a certain way that we're nurturing the occurrence of homosexual desire by a way of not really living harmoniously by the design of nature, by giving ourselves pressure and objectives and needs and all the elements of that we must wield as a civilization, whether it be money, armies, capitalism, or feudal responsibility of the patriarchy of the kingdoms, or what have you. Our designs of civilization have never really been very good to the design of nature, which would have always attempted to not would have never resulted in an excess of homosexuality or of homosexual desire, of perversities, because it is not that its main goal is the male, the female, and procreation for every life form, not just for human beings. And so this is understood when we own up to the loose cannon that our logical intelligence can be. And so we err greatly, and yet we're very capable of doing a lot of good and finding medical sciences and healing ourselves that animals can't do, and we can heal biology. And yet that same intelligence, which hasn't learned to harmonize with what nature would want us to use our intelligence for, also creates a lot of harm and irritation and unbalance, as we all know. And an increase in a desire for homosexuality in general and in society and in the human species is probably a result of our faulted forms of society and civilization that make us be a certain way or understand sciences and values and principles and believe punishing religions instead of understanding that we're not being good parents, for example. And this is not a work of the devil, but it was a work of, not realizing this kid was falling away. He felt this way. Nobody knew it. And before you knew it, he couldn't relate to any males in his family. And so we were never that sophisticated, and we kept believing that it was the devil's work. And so the existence of homosexuality has always been a result, not the existence of homosexuality in human sexuality, but the amount of desire or solution or healing by seeking or by finding homosexuality in the species, which is a way of looking at homosexuality as something that we resort to because of things that we didn't nurture or we didn't raise properly, which is very scientific. Would always have had this number that has always been with us. And therefore, that number, although it has always been excessive, was somehow kept by different forces, by wrong forces like rejection, social rejection, religious rejection, what have you, and then other natural forces. Somehow, for some reason, I don't feel completely right about it. So instead of having 200 people you sleep with, you maybe had 3 or 4 homosexual experiences in your life, because all those forces, including your own sort of schizophrenic characteristic of homosexuality, which is it's natural. I'm not going to explain that right now, but part of human sexuality, kept it so that the numbers would have been a certain numbers, pretty much the same numbers we have always had through the result of our forms of civilization, except that in the 70s we said, no, wait a second. let's just, hey, let's not allow anybody to think it can be bad or doubtful or questionable or understand why it really happens. Are we doing something wrong socially? Did nothing that is critical. Now, negative criticism, it's very interesting. It's really a fascinating negative criticism is present in everything that we improve. I mean, you try to invent a car, and if you started like the Flintstones, you would find that the stone wheels would pretty much tether away the road pretty soon. And so it's a negative criticism. This way of designing cars is not really working for us. It's there's negative criticism in every understanding of nature and of our own inventions. Wrong understanding and critical understanding. Yeah, storms are beautiful, but we don't want them to destroy our villages. Negative criticism of understanding of when it comes to homosexuality, we've stripped all that. We said, no, nothing negative, nothing critical. What we're actually saying is, don't be intelligent about homosexuality. That's what the United States, England, and the West has basically been disseminating through the world. You have to accept it. Why? Because the people that seek or that have an inclination, that find that band-aid, or in homosexuality, which is what nature does. It tries to compensate for things that happened and didn't happen when we were younger, plus all the ways in which we were more inclined, where we're inclined to react stronger than other people. That whole entirety of circumstances still produce somebody who um, will always carry, as a natural part of the human homosexual experience, something that says, wait, this is not really, doesn't feel so right, or it's not accepted by those people, or just always, it will never find, how can I say this? It will never find stability, even if you train everybody to say, yeah, at some point, somebody can say, wait a second, is that supposed to go in there? You know, it's never going to be stable. It's always going to suscitate the question. And what we're doing is we're saying, don't make the question, because we need it to work as a human right, a civil right of human freedom of expression, independent, whatever. And so by doing that, by exporting and expanding and installing that culturally, and telling other countries that if you don't think about homosexuality that way, you don't understand human rights. You don't know how to respect people. By doing that, what we're doing is we're increasing the amount of people who say, whoa, well, wait, I gotta not pay attention to my doubts. I gotta not listen to those people that say, I don't think you're gonna be happy that way. No, don't listen to any constructive, intelligent criticism that may sound negative. So as a result, we produce a much larger Castro, West Hollywood, the Village, a much larger population of people who live their whole lives homosexually, because now it's actually something that nature wanted for me. It's something that I'm optimally completed and optimized in my expression of living form this way. So everybody believes that they're meant to be that way, and um, instead of doing the hard work, actually let's say, going back to the 70s and saying, well, what is causing so much desire to be loved by the same gender? How are we sending off our kids that they continue to seek the love of their same gender? Well, the way we work, the way we're teaching our parents to take care of their kids, the way we relate to them in school and have them relate to their parents by school authority and influences and prince, uh, ethics of work ethics and demands of capitalism, and so many things that could be playing into how parents end up thinking, and also the how to think about life, the very philosophies that we're teaching our citizens to believe about civil independence and freedom of expression and da da da, and how does that and have parents end up treating their children? How do they deal with their? Do they get involved? We see things like, for example, a kid goes back home and asks his father to help him with a bully at school, and maybe not that long ago, that parent would have gone with faced off the other kid's dad at school, and situations that we may still remember if you're not too young, that we're still humoring in TV shows or what have you, and then compared that to now, we're really sort of stifling ourselves. Don't interfere. Don't be part of that. Don't act that way. Don't get in the way of. We're basically not teaching ourselves to not interact with one another. Don't confront. Just be very sort of stoic, placid, silent. Don't get involved. Don't teach your kid about how to love a girl if he's scared of a girl, or if he's and he likes. We don't have that conversation anymore, but we do have the conversation where we're supposed to accept kids that are gay, or that we have categorized gay, and that we see somebody who operated themselves and had a transgender operation. We are teaching other things, but the things that have to do with all those natural social mechanisms that have been with us through all of evolution, we've decided not those. Let's reinvent the species. And as a result, we may be causing so a lot of homosexual desire in the population. And so what we did is basically we decided we don't want to be intelligent about that. We don't want to understand, because the saving grace could have been that the high amount of desire for homosexuality could have been a red light towards having us pay attention, have a red light that would indicate and tell us to pay attention to how we are treating ourselves by the design of our society and the design of our values and the ways of our philosophies that result in how our parents are raising. And so we could have potentially become a better world, a better society, more stronger morally, more secure of ourselves, stronger in our sexuality, stronger in our commitments and confidence and clarity towards life, and basically been a better society if we had said, wait a second, that's indicating something. Instead, we didn't want to see it as an indicator anymore. We started to, like I said, in the 70s, but we decided we don't want to see it as an indicator anymore. We just want to call it an option. An option, and for that to work, so that it could be an option, a civil option, we had to then compensate by silencing misgivings. We had to mold everything else differently so that that could work. And so I hope that this makes the post make sense now. It's not, and it's not really a big deal. The United States has done a lot of harm, like many other countries, like China and Russia and France and England. Not to mention England, how much soot have we put in pollution? We are the biggest contaminators. The big powers of the world are the big contaminators of the environment. So it's really not a big deal. It's not like, look at the one evil, the United States. It may be a little harder to process that claim to most impact as a country, human sexuality. Quite a quite a, what do you call it, quite a medal to carry. But you know what, look at it the other way around. Look at it having a having hurt or damaged or not known, plowed forward with convinced that we were doing something right but we were doing it wrong, gives us the knowledge to be also the first ones that say, we already know what this is going to do. Stop, everybody. We got to do something else. And who else has that right but the person that can take their dignity, take in the best grace possible, with seriousness and not immaturely like this, but really say, we see what we've done. Everybody pay attention. We don't want any other country to continue believing this crap. I don't know. But yeah, so China, if they wanted to, I doubt they're going to do it because they're not as crazy as I am. But so this explains my post. All right. I hope it came across somehow. Ciao. Oh wait, it's on the cell phone now. All right.